like to call to order City of Lake Forest District 67 Board of Education meeting for June 24th, 2014. May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Anderson?
Present.
Mrs. Fisher?
Present.
Mr. Schuler?
Here.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Here.
Mr. Lemke?
Here.
Mr. Folker?
Here.
Mr. Borkowski will not be here, but you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. The first item on our agenda this evening, welcome everyone. The first item on the agenda this evening is the President's report, and the President's report this evening will be presented by the Board Vice President, Leslie Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. In the past month, in addition to refining the vision and mission process, which we will be voting on tonight, the Board of Education participated in the Board Governance Review, an annual self-evaluation facilitated by Barbara Toney of the Illinois Association of School Boards. This process began in late spring with each board member independently and anonymously responding to a variety of questions, including, but not limited to, rating the board's performance on clarifying the district's purpose, as well as the board's ability to connect with the community. On May 29th, the Board of Education came together with Ms. Toney to review the comments and identify areas of concern. It was clear there was consensus among board members regarding the identification of our strengths, as well as the areas which need improvement. We also recognize the growth we have made in the past year as we have become more seasoned trustees of the community. During this reflective, cooperative, and thorough process, we identified key areas of focus for the upcoming year. This is the second straight year the current Board of Education has participated in the Board Governance Review, and each of us finds value in the process. Ms. Toney wisely reminds us, you cannot manage what you do not measure. Another key activity that occurred in the past month was the strategic planning session initiated and led by Mike Simic and Lauren Fagel. Examining the milestones set by the Board of Education during the mission vision process, i.e., what will we have achieved by 2024, administrators and staff were guided through a data dive and began creating action plans addressing the 6 areas of progress District 67 will be measuring. These include achievement, instruction, assessment, talent, partnership, and environment. That would be learning environment. It was a positive experience to witness as the focus of the day-long meeting paired our vision and mission with concrete plans of action, putting theory into practice. The group will reconvene on August 11th, 2014 to continue its important work. In the interim, individual group members are participating in book studies and contributing ideas to the administration as reflection occurs. One Board of Education member represented District 115 during the day, and I represented District 67. That concludes the President's report for this evening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fisher. The next item on our agenda is the Superintendent's report. Our superintendent is on a well-deserved vacation this week and will not be giving a report. The next item on the agenda is public participation. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the board on a topic of their choosing? Seeing none. The next item on our agenda is reports and discussions. There are no reports or discussions this evening, to the best of my knowledge. The next item on the agenda is board committees. The first being the Board Education Committee, chaired by Leslie Fisher.
The Education Committee has not met in the previous month. We will be meeting in July. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is the Finance and Operations Committee, Rick Schuler.
The Finance and Operations Committee also did not meet in June, and I'm recalling July 7th, but I was about to look. 8th, which is a Tuesday. Did I get that right? Okay, that's the next meeting.
Thank you very much. The next item is the Policy Committee, chaired by Mike Borkowski. Mr. Borkowski is on an extremely well-deserved vacation. Mr. Folker, do you have anything to say on the Policy Committee?
Why, I do, Bill, yes. The Policy Committee met on June 4th. Present were Mr. Borkowski and myself. Also present were Mr. Anderson, Mr. Simic, Ms. Hermes, Mr. Albus, and Mrs. Fowler. The following items were discussed within the context of the committee meeting. There was a proposed amendment to Policy 530, which is the district's hiring process and criteria. The policy focused on the opportunity to reword the policy so that it more clearly articulated the board's position and expectations relative to the district's process and philosophy when it comes to hiring employees or filling job openings. The committee discussed the proposal and recommended that at this time, we want to go back and amend that. The question is, does much of what was included in the proposed change really belong more in a district administrative process manual, which both Mr. Simic and Dr. Wilcox will be working on as we move forward. We decided to table the change at this time, and we'll discuss it at a future meeting. We also discussed policy 5.330, which deals with sick days, vacation, holidays, and leaves for educational support personnel. For education, the educational support personnel are those people who are not covered by collective bargaining or by individual contracts. The policy was proposed to be amended to reflect current practice. That then begged the question, shouldn't we be having practice that amends the policy, which brought up some other questions, and as a result, we decided to postpone further agreement on that proposed change until the next policy committee meeting. We also discussed upcoming press issues that we will be discussing this evening on policy 5.180. And lastly, we discussed policies 7.20 and 7.180 dealing with student harassment and bullying prevention. And both of those policies will be discussed this evening. The policy committee did not feel that we needed to review those further or make any additional changes. What we discussed at our last board meeting was going to remain the same. Lastly, as I mentioned, the district has committed to building and constructing an administrative procedures manual. There is a concern that much of what's baked into our current policies really dives into specifics that are probably best served in a more practices manual than necessarily being embedded in policy. And the district has made, has agreed to work on that on an ad hoc basis as opportunities arise. And Mrs. Fowler will be creating a central repository within the district files to start collecting changes and practice opportunities as they're developed. And that's it for the policy committee.
Thank you very much for that report. Jeff, the next item is the Compensation Committee. Rob Lemke.
Thanks, Bill. The Compensation Committee met at 5 o'clock on June 3rd with Alan Ellis, Bill, Mike Barkowski, Jeff Folker, Jen Hermes, and myself. The meeting started with a brief discussion of the district's various benefits offered to administrators. We discussed the pros and cons of having a specific benefits package that would be offered to all administrators versus the current practice of negotiating different benefit packages for each employee. The committee then began a lengthy discussion regarding the pros and cons of continuing our policy of offering 6% automatic raises when an employee announces his or her intention to enter the retirement pipeline. As there are a number of issues of importance regarding this retirement policy, it was decided that the chair of the committee, with the help of Alan and Jen, will write a brief study outlining the pros and cons of the retirement policy. The meeting adjourned at 6:30. And for the first time, we don't know when we're going to meet again. So,
Thank you, Rob. We now come to liaison reports. The first is the North Suburban Special Education District, Mike Borkowski. Mr. Borkowski is not here this evening. Next is the Illinois Association of School Boards, Ed Red, which is myself. And there is no report this month. Next is the Curriculum Coordinating Committee, Leslie Fisher.
The Curriculum Coordinating Committee has not met within the last month. We will reconvene in the fall.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. The next item is the Spirit of 67 Foundation, Leslie Fisher.
I'm going to be redundant here. The Spirit of 67 Foundation, as well as the Executive APT, will not meet until the fall. Thank you.
For the record, we've also covered item E. Are there any other liaison reports which board members would like to present at this time? Hearing none. We now move to action items. The first is approval of policy 4:140 update, second reading. Mr. Folker.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. This policy deals with the waiver of student fees. Mrs. Hermes, do you want to just quickly remind the board what changes were made the last time? And we have not made any additional changes in the policy committee since the first reading.
Correct. There was two main changes on the original up to the first reading. The first regarded what levels we use to actually qualify a family for a student waiver. We are a little more generous in our policy than the original press version, which just follows the waiver for free and reduced lunch. So We did have that change, and the second change is we're a little quicker on the notification to families, which is the final paragraph, where we respond within 10 days.
As I said, there were no changes made in the policy committee meeting in June, so I would recommend moving forward in the second reading.
Thank you very much. May I have a motion to approve policy 4140, update, second reading?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Schuler,
Aye.
Mr. Folker,
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Lemke,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next item is approval of policy 820, update, second reading. Mr. Folker.
This policy deals with community relations, specifically community use of school facilities. Again, this was discussed briefly in the policy committee meeting in June. There was a recommendation that no additional changes or edits need to be made. The original changes that were made before the first reading dealt with, similar to what I discussed in my report regarding rewording the policy to streamline it so that specific aspects of practice are taken out and put in an administrative practices manual. And the changes in the wording, I believe, talk about how specific needs and forms that need to be filled out can be found in administrative procedures as opposed to the policy itself. Jen, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Just so I'm clear, at number 2 here, that does not affect the property or liability of the school district. So does that waive our liability if someone gets hurt on our property?
No. Essentially what we did was the original policy got into specifics relative to the forms that needed to be filled out and the specific information, people that needed to be contacted, and the feeling was that level of detail is best served in an administrative procedures or practices manual as long as we reference that appropriately in the policy itself, we're covered, but it will be correct. So it is clearly articulated that for the specifics and the forms and the approvals, you need to reference the administrative policies manual, so you're still covered in that regard.
Right. May I have a motion to approve policy 820, update, second reading?
Bill, can I just add one thing? I'm sorry. In the forms, Leslie, in the forms that are filled out, it does clearly spell out the need for, or the liability issue that you're asking about, so it is covered.
I don't think you can actually get rid of your liability. You ask parties to sign off on it, but at the end of the day, they can sue you for it anyway, and you just have to have good liability insurance. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
Anybody can sue anybody. I think you're correct, but we do require that they indemnify us and that they provide a certificate of insurance, and it's a pretty substantial amount. I want to say it's like $2 million or something. So we try to protect ourselves as much as we can.
In the
if someone
details of
wants to
the
do that.
process of the practice, we require anyone using our facilities to indemnify us on their insurance. So they're covered.
Other questions or comments from board members? I'm hearing none. Could I have a motion to approve policy 820, update, second reading?
so moved.
Second.
Second.
A roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Sorry, Mrs. Clemenson,
Aye.
Mr. Lemke,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
Mr. Folker,
Aye.
Mr. Schuler,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next item is on the agenda is approval of policy 5180, update, first reading. Mr. Folker.
This policy deals with temporary illness or temporary incapacity of district employees. This deals with some recommendations that came from press. The district has decided to accept some of the recommendations and not others. Mrs. Hermes, could you kind of, again, provide an overview of what we've agreed to and what we chose not to? If you're positioned to do that. Don't mean to put you on the spot.
Right, I don't think I worked on this original policy, but it actually, this really isn't a substantive change. If you look at the first comment, the board did not choose to make those changes, but also the last sentence of that second paragraph said this paragraph shall not be considered a limitation. So the board still has all of its authority to make decisions regarding individual employees, but this does say specifically the board could designate a disability for someone who is absent after a certain period of time. But there's a ton of discretion there as well.
Questions or comments from board members? Just
So where it's written in no, Jeff, does that mean we're not taking that wording and
Correct.
we're keeping the existing
Correct.
wording?
So we're keeping our essentially, we're keeping our existing policy intact, except for the addition of the last sentence there in the second paragraph, just to continue to show that this is not a limitation.
Mr. Folker, as it's part of the previous press, issue 84, we can decide to waive the first reading and go straight to the second reading, if you would like to do that. That is our normal practice when it comes from press, and we just follow through, but it's up to you.
Yeah, seeing as though there's no substantial change to the policy, I would recommend that we waive the first reading or move, I don't know what's the appropriate.
well, could I?
I would move that we waive the first reading and go straight to the second reading.
Is there a second?
So moved, or second.
Okay. Could I have a roll call vote, please? This is for the waiver, and then we'll have a separate vote on the passing.
Mr. Folker,
Aye.
Mr. Lemke,
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Schuler,
Aye.
motion carries.
Yes. So could I have a motion for final approval of a policy 5180 update?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Lemke,
Aye.
Mr. Schuler,
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Folker,
Aye.
motion carries.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is approval of the final mission, vision, and goals work. And this is a very long project that Beth Clemenson has done remarkable work on, along with the rest of the board and many people in the administration. Beth, you have any final comments before we vote on this?
Well, as you recall, last month at our board meeting, I went through the community feedback. And so that board members would have a bit of time to kind of digest that work and reflect on it. We did have a board workshop a couple weeks ago, and I would say we did not make substantive changes from what I presented last month. However, I think we did make a few meaningful word choices. So words do matter, and we tried to pick words that really reflect the essence of what we were trying to communicate. So this is as we left that meeting, so it should be very consistent with what we discussed a couple weeks ago.
Thank you, Beth. May I have a motion for approval of the final mission, vision, and goals?
So moved.
May I have a second? Roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Schuler,
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Lemke,
Aye.
Mr. Folker,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
motion carries.
That's great. The next item on the agenda is approval of an ULP settlement agreement. This was discussed in closed session. May I have a motion to approve item E?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Lemke,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
Mr. Folker,
Aye.
Mr. Schuler,
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson,
Aye.
motion carries.
Item on the agenda is approval of 2015 staff compensation. This was also discussed in closed session. May I have a motion to approve item F?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Lemke,
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher, sorry, I beg your pardon, I did it again. Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Schuler,
Aye.
Mr. Folker,
Aye.
motion carries.
Next is approval of a workers' compensation insurance contract. Are there anyone like to comment on that from your table?
Just a brief comment. You will see that this is a larger than normal increase for us. We've unfortunately had 2 years of pretty adverse losses. Knock on pressed wood or whatever we have here. We're having a good year this year. So hopefully with a little cleaning up of our losses, we'll see our rates drop back to maybe normal or the normal ranges going forward.
And the amount of the increase, I know it's in the packet.
With estimated payrolls is 11.4%.
Yeah, okay.
But we also got other quotes from other carriers, so that's important to note that.
It is. There was 5 proposals solicited. They ranged from 118,000 to 160-some thousand, I believe. So of course this is the lowest of the 5.
So we get what we get based on our
Yeah.
history, so.
Other questions or comments from board members? May I have a motion to approve the workers' compensation insurance contract?
So moved?
A second?
Second?
Roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next item is the approval of the waste recycling agreement. Is there Mr. Albus?
Over the past year, Carol White has been in discussions with people from the city about the city taking over our waste service. There's some benefits to us in the fact that we would lock into a known increase over the next several years, absent of landfill cost changes. There's a benefit to the city because there's more efficiency in the utilization of their equipment and the servicing. So it's a shared service opportunity with them. The city drew up the intergovernmental agreement. We've reviewed it, and we'd recommend approval.
I was curious why the cost at Everett was so so much higher than at Cherokee and Sheridan. It seemed, more like what they charged at Deer Path, which is a significantly larger school.
You also have that annex there with the Park District, or with the Parks and Rec. Cherokee and Everett, I guess, would seem like they would be closer in line than Sheridan. But that's all I could think of off the top of my head.
So we're having to pay for the park and rec space as well?
If we share a dumpster, yeah. We are now, I don't know if we have another agreement where they reimburse us on that.
Then that's probably it. If we're, I'm sure it's all going into one dumpster, and I'm sure that's driving the added cost.
Alan, could you speak just briefly to, it looks like we have a bid from a vendor, and then we went to the city and said, well, can you do it for the same price? And they said yes. So it doesn't look like it's actually got bid out in any way. And so just tell us what you're thinking about in terms of that.
It was bid several years ago. Now, I'd have to look and see if that was a 3 or a 5-year contract, but typically we would do those for 1 year with 4-year renewals. And so the vendor said, well, we'll do it next year for X amount. And then in the discussion with the city said, we'll match that. And then, as I said earlier, the benefit to us is locking in on a CPI increase for the next several years. The benefit to the city is that it's a more efficient use of the equipment that they've invested in. So that seemed like a win-win for both organizations.
So our current vendor would come back every year with a non-CPI number?
I'd have to look at the history. It could be CPI, it could be higher, it could be lower.
And so how much longer will this run for then?
This would be a 3-year contract with the city.
And it's replacing a 3-year contract we had with a vendor. We just opted out of that contract.
Yes.
Has this been reviewed by the finance committee? I was just curious what if you guys had any discussion on this. It looks like in the letter it says that the current vendor has quoted a CPI increase of 3% for the upcoming school year, but we decided to go with the city.
Yes, the city matched it. That's correct.
I'm not sure what the aversion is to going with the city. I mean, I'm rather indifferent to it, but I just assume team up with the city's contractor on this. I mean,
we have any idea what we've paid for Everett? It just, do we have any history of what we've paid to our current vendor to pick up at Everett? Is it close to the $450-some dollars? It just seems odd that suddenly that school is almost 3 times as much as the other two, particularly Cherokee. It's the same size building. Same size, same number of kids, same amount of food that you're disposing of and things like that. Yeah, it just seems odd. Do we have any history as to what we've been billed for Everett in the past?
Sure, yeah, we can pull it, absolutely.
'Cause, not that I have an aversion to using the city, it's just, if this is being driven by the Park and Rec add-on or that area because of camps or paper or food and things like, then we should be going back to the city saying, don't charge us for the whole thing, we should share in the cost.
There may be an offset, I don't know that off the top of my head. I mean, this is a $15,600 contract. Again, I'll reiterate, I think it helps the city because it is more efficient use of the equipment that they've invested in, so that's good. And I think it helps us because it locks us in on a CPI. Now, we can choose to bid it in 3 years and see where it falls at that point, but we look for opportunities to partner up with the city. You know, we've done it on a number of occasions. And
I just want to be clear to Rick and others that I don't have a problem dealing with the city. I think it's great to look for synergy opportunities. I was just curious, since it seems like there's a few questions, if there had been discussion in the Finance Committee, you know, that perhaps would answer some of the questions.
well, the Everett question, we can certainly, you've piqued my curiosity on it now as well, but we can follow up on that.
Other questions or comments? I mean, one thing would, if the all-in price is the same as the outside one, you know, we could approve this, and then we could ask Alan to come back to us and explain why Everett has 3 times as much garbage as.
The cost is the same.
Right.
I recommend we vote for it, but
Yeah.
sure, if we're missing something and there's
what I'm
a way
saying.
to pass on the cost of that dumpster to the city or half of it,
Yeah.
you'll agree to get back to us, right? Either way, that'd be great.
I think that's a reasonable. Well, are there other questions or comments from board members? Hearing no public comments.
No audible.
Could I have a motion to approve the waste recycle agreement?
So moved?
Could I have a second?
Second.
All right. A roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, but we would like to, I guess, have a follow-up on that one question, Alan, so thank you. Next is approval of the paving project bid award. Alan?
Several months ago, we did talk at the Finance and Operations Committee about trying to partner with the city as they were preparing to go out to bid for summer paving work. The timing of our fiscal years and the timing of the bid specs just didn't work out. And we said we don't want to drop the idea, but we'll try and align better for next year. But Carol White and the city kept talking, and the city, to their credit, volunteered to engineer the projects that we were going to do anyway, and we would go ahead and do a separate bid. So that's what we've done. So we owe some gratitude to the city in the fact that they've saved us on some architectural and engineering costs. We did go out to bid, and as shown in your packet, there were 4 bids received. A Lamp came in as the low bidder at $293,917.50, and that is to replace the Deer Path Middle School main driveway and the Sheridan Elementary School main and side drives. The projects will start in July, be completed by August 15th. And Carol had previously in the capital projects budget estimated a cost of $330,000. The project came in $36,000 below the estimate. So we would recommend approval.
Does that include the parking lot at Sheridan, the front parking area at Sheridan? Drives, I just,
Main and side drive, I believe it's the whole parking lot, but let me clarify that.
Okay,
If
yeah.
I'm wrong on that, I'll let you know.
okay,
but I believe-
I assumed, but when it said drive, I just want to make sure it just wasn't the Circle Drive area, but also included the parking area.
Yeah, a big part of it is, and not just Circle, but it's the side. It's connecting to the back lot. It's terrible. Yeah.
And the water management of that had to be re-engineered too, as well, because that would come down that driveway and slam into the building in years past. And so hopefully this will help alleviate some of that.
Other questions from board members? May I have a motion to approve the waste recycle agreement with the recommended vendor? May I have a motion to approve the paving project award with the approved vendor, or the recommended vendor of A-Lamp?
So moved?
May I have a second?
Second?
May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Motion carries.
The next item on the agenda is approval of human resource items. Some of these were discussed in closed session, but I believe that Ms. Lauren Fagel is going to speak. Lauren.
Good evening. Dr. Wilcox and I are very pleased to recommend Dr. Angela Sopko as the next principal of Everett School. Angela comes to us with a just recently completed doctorate in curriculum and instruction from Loyola University in Chicago. She spent 16 years serving the North Shore as a school psychologist through NSSED, as well as 4 years prior to that as a school psychologist in DuPage West Cook Regional Special Education District. She began her administrative career at South Park Elementary in Deerfield District 109, serving as the assistant principal and student services coordinator for 5 years, and just finished her 4th year serving as the principal at Empire Elementary School in District 145, Freeport. Angela lives with her husband in Wilmette, and she has 3 grown children. And Lori will tell you a little bit about the interview process and what drew us to Angela.
This was a very thorough process, and we are thrilled with the outcome. We're very, very pleased with the fact that the district made the decision to once again work with School Exec Connect. 2 members, the owner of School Exec Connect and one of the gentlemen that works closely with the organization, spent quite a bit of time interviewing different members from the Everett community, teachers, parents, and so forth, to get a profile with what Everett was looking for, knowing that Dr. Weimer was going to be a tough person to follow. So it was really important to speak to as many constituents as possible to really get a sense of what was Everett looking for to continue the fabulous just setting at Everett School. It's a wonderful, wonderful school, and they had heard that time and time again and wanted to make sure someone could come in and keep that forward momentum going. Here is what the Everett Elementary principal profile looks like from the people who were interviewed. The new principal should be a person who is compassionate, calm, and approachable, generates optimism and a positive attitude to students, parents, and teachers, establishes sincere relations by focusing on and listening to other people, takes time to know children's names and their families, cares about teachers and staff in their classrooms and in their lives, has a proven strategy to establish relationships, is concerned about emotional wellness, focuses on the whole child, and understands that learning is more than test scores, holds high expectations for student learning, has a superior understanding of curriculum, instruction, assessment, and child development. And we feel incredibly confident that that was the barometer that we used in talking to some very highly qualified candidates. And we came to the decision after extensive conversations with multiple people who have worked with Angela in her past, that she is the right person to fulfill this high standard that the Everett community has set forth for us, and we are very confident that she's going to do an outstanding job. We're very pleased to bring her to you this evening.
Thank you very much, and welcome. May I have a motion to approve the human resource items?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second?
May I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Welcome. I think Everett just celebrated its 100th year anniversary this year, so quite a long tradition. And we have a board member, Ms. Fisher, I think, who's an alumni of Everett.
Alumni of Sheridan, but my children are alumni
Oh, sorry, there you go.
of Everett. So congratulations, this is a special place.
Sorry about that. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. We have a long consent agenda here, items A through P. Are there any items on the consent agenda which a board member would like removed for further consideration?
Yeah, I would like to talk more about the pre-engagement letter for William Blair. And so-
Thank you very much. May I have a motion to remove item G from the consent agenda for further deliberation?
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Are we set on removing it?
We're just
Or-
going to take it out of the consent agenda at this point, and then
Oh, I
then
see.
we're going to pass everything else, and then we're going to
We can
see
discuss
if we
it.
either discuss it or table it.
Because I think maybe, yeah, clarification
Exactly.
might
We're going to have a discussion.
solve the issue. Okay.
Perfect. Was that a second?
And I'll second it.
Okay. So could I have a roll call vote, please? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Motion carries.
So I think we're going to vote on the consent agenda first, and then we will discuss item G separately. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Could I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is what was item G on the consent agenda, approval of the pre-engagement letter for William Blair. And I think some board members had questions on this. Is there a member of either Alan or Jen who would like to talk about this? Alan?
Sure.
What we're looking for is, I think some of us are confused as to exactly what it's asking for, and there's a lot of information subsequent to the initial recommendation on the actual act, what it means. But so I think maybe some of us are getting lost with what are we actually requesting and what does it actually do?
I think it was at the end of our last Finance and Ops meeting, I briefly mentioned this, but I think I also mentioned I didn't know enough about it to really explain it or be dangerous at that point in time. So since then, I've tried to learn about it, and I've made calls to colleagues and familiarized myself with what's in front of you. And had I been more uncomfortable with it, I would have been in contact with Mr. Schuler about scheduling a meeting prior to this meeting. But I think there are several options here as we go through this. And so that's why it's in your packet for tonight. If, from what I'm told from Liz, if we don't act by July 1, then some components of the Frank Dodd Wall Street Consumer Protection Act would kick in. And what that would do is limit the historical relationship we've had with William Blair, where from time to time, I think if you've been to a finance committee meeting, she will come out, talk about the market, talk about opportunities in the market. Without a pre-engagement letter, that relationship, there's some walls to that. And so I've summarized here in the first 4 bullets that are there what those options are. One is you can enter into a pre-engagement letter, which would allow us to maintain that historical relationship. We could engage a finance team, which would be comprised of an underwriter and a financial analyst. Each would have specific roles and responsibilities, but I think there is going to be some overlap there. We could use an RFP process to just basically elicit ideas from markets, or we could engage an independent financial advisor registered with the SEC on a retainer. Now, when I look at our debt issuances, they're relatively small. The only thing I see on even the long horizon is opportunities to restructure the debt we currently have for interest savings.
Alan, I'm not so worried about, and I don't think others are so worried about what we would actually refinance or any new debt issuances. It's more of what does this actually mean? And if I could, I'm going to try to paraphrase it, and then if I'm off, then we have a whole different discussion. The SEC came down with this regulation, and if we don't act on this by July 1st, we're precluded from using William Blair as an advisor on a new, as a bidder on a new debt issuance,
Yes.
because they're also our advisor, and that's a potential conflict of interest.
Yes.
If we do agree to this,
They can't be our
pre-engagement,
advisor and our.
right, they're already our
But-
advisor, but they'd
right.
be precluded from being
The
Underwriter.
underwriter.
an underwriter on a debt
This
issuance.
is to separate investment banking from investment advice.
Right.
Okay.
The key is we'd be automatically, because of this regulation from the SEC, precluded from using them for both because of the potential for conflict of interest. If we do approve this, we have the option of using them, but not the obligation to use them.
Correct. This
They
could-
can bid as an underwriter, they can make proposals as underwriters, but we don't have to use them, and we can get somebody else to give an opinion on what they're offering. We can get other bids, right? We can still hire other investment firms.
Yes, we can cancel, and that's the reason I brought this forth, is we can cancel it with 30 days' notice.
So it's an
prudent-
option, not an obligation to use them.
Yes.
And it's all a result of this SEC regulation that's trying to protect against conflicts of interest,
Right,
which
so-
we've all read about.
So to put that into our real-life experience, at the last meeting or the meeting before, I think we had Liz there to talk about the opportunity to refinance some of our debt and save some interest costs that would come to fruition starting in October for a January issuance.
But I get
Without-
all that, but that's not the issue. The
Well,
issue
but it
is.
because if
it-
we don't do this, that advice, where she comes out and gives us that advice, she wouldn't be able to do.
No, I understand that, but the concern with the regulation is that there is a conflict, and she could recommend that we refinance a bond because they get a fee from it. And that's the inherent conflict, is they're recommending something that we don't really need to do or is not in our best interest because they get fees from it. But I'm okay with this because I want the option for us to use them. They've proven to be good. They are giving us good advice, but we don't have to use them.
Or, as I say in my next to last paragraph, if the intent of the rule change is to provide greater clarity of roles between underwriters and financial advisors and avoid conflicts of interest, I believe that can be accomplished by utilizing a pricing consultant on large issuances or restructuring. So if there was any doubt, it's, I think what you alluded to, you bring in a third party and they can weigh in on this deal doesn't make sense or this makes a lot of sense.
We had this discussion, as you said, at the end of our last meeting, and I think the conclusion was we have enough knowledge with our administration and our board to probably, have a good eye on this without a third party, but we have that option as well, to have somebody else come in and say, hey, are we looking at this right, or are they giving us bad suggestions? So I think we're covered.
I would agree.
I think that's an important discussion, and this is a good thing to talk about. So, other questions or comments from board members, or would anyone like to? I mean, there's, I guess, some level of time pressure, but not really. If we don't act this month, we can do this next month, right? And then,
No, there is something about July 1, but if you act on it, and if there's any concern, I would recommend passing it, and then we'll talk about it at the July 8th meeting, and if there are still concerns, we'll cancel it.
gotcha. Okay.
Given that this went into effect in 2010, is it just, or at least was voted on in 2010, is it just going into effect now, or how have we been handling it for the last 4 years?
Just going into effect. So they pass a law, then they write the rules, then there's a comment period, and then there's an implementation period, so.
All right. Could I have a motion to approve the pre-engagement letter for William Blair?
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Could I have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Folker?
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mrs. Clemenson?
Aye.
Mr. Lemke?
Aye.
Mr. Schuler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
We have FOIA requests this month from Ms. Delicia Copeland and 3 from Ms. Nancy Thorner of Lake Bluff, Illinois. Next board meeting is Tuesday, July 22nd, right here. May I have, and that is it. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. We are adjourned.